Welcome to The Mystic Lens, a podcast by Current Collective Church where we explore the spiritual path through stories of transformation from real people in our community and explorations of Christian tradition through a mystic perspective. Our hope is that these conversations will help us feel even more connected to God, ourselves, and each other, inspiring us to live more expansively from the well of living water within. To learn more or connect with us further, visit thisiscurrent.org.
Tristan, welcome to the Mystic Lens podcast, and thank you for carving out some time for a fun conversation that we're about to have today. Thank you.
Well, thank you for asking me to be here.
Absolutely. A little background, just for those that are listening and tuning in. Tristan reached out from YouTube, I think it was initially, right? It was my other project that I did for years, or was it Current was your first connection with me? Spiritual Nomad or Current?
I think it was Spiritual Nomad, which took me to Current. So in some order, yes.
Yeah, it was some YouTube connection, which has been super fun for me, and also really fun to have these conversations with people. As those of you listening can probably already tell, Tristan does not live in the U.S., although we'll get to some of the U.S. history of his story. But it's just fun. People that don't live here, don't live in San Diego, are still connecting and a part of this thing that is happening. And I very much so include people like yourself, Tristan, as being a part of the Current community, even though you're across the pond, you know? And I'm just grateful for you to be able to have found through the internet myself and what we're doing and our resonant conversations that we've had, and then have the invitation and opportunity for you to come and share with people who are local and showing up to Sunday services, who you are, and people being able to connect with you because of this cool thing called the internet. And so just really grateful for technology. You know, it's a double-edged sword. But grateful for technology and grateful for the friendship that we've developed. And I'm grateful that people are going to be able to hear your story and some of your reflections and things that we'll get into that I just think are super freaking cool, and some of the combos that we've had. So as a backdrop for some of that, if you don't mind, just kind of share a little bit about your origin story a little bit and help people just kind of know who you are, and then we'll jump into some of the other more fun concepts and topics and things.
Cool. Yes. Well, as you said, I don't live in the States anymore, but I was born in northern Indiana and grew up there. And exactly. I met someone from Elkhart yesterday as well.
Really?
Yes. At the gym. Very surprising. But so I grew up in South Bend in Indiana, and then slowly moved west as I got older and ended up in California, in Monterey. And when I was a child, I was raised a Christian. Started going to church when I was about 6. I don't know whether the Awanas still exist. If that's still a thing.
I think so. For better or for worse.
It was good for me, actually.
Yeah.
And I sort of had my first contact with church in that way. So went to sort of a Bible Baptist-y church in South Bend. And we went for years to one of the women who helped teach the Sunday school. She had a Bible study in her house on Tuesday afternoons. And my mom and my brother and I would go after school. And for years, that was kind of church. Tuesday afternoon, with the sort of felt paper pictures from the Bible, telling the stories, singing the songs, doing the sword drill, all that sort of real Bible-based stuff. And then later on, when I said this to a spiritual director who was a vicar, she said, "You were washed in the Bible as a child." And I thought, wow, I really was. It's sort of in me. And not in an overbearing way, it's just in me. Mm-hmm. And I really am happy about that. Really value that. But one reason that, as we moved and didn't necessarily go to a church is, compared to Britain, America has far more denominations. And my mother, who grew up in the Church of England, wasn't really into that. And so when we eventually found the Episcopal Church, which is the Church of England in America, we opened the Book of Common Prayer. My mother went, "Oh, this is much better." And we ended up in the Episcopal Church when I was a teenager, because I came out and we were going to a non-denominational church, and a chap who helped to run a youth group for gay teenagers asked whether we went to church, and my mum told him where we went. He said, "You probably don't want to keep going there. Come to the Episcopal Church." And so I sort of fell into this liturgical practice and, discovered, the liturgy of the Mass and of the different things that happen in a liturgical church, and really felt it. It was really quite powerful. Also used to go to a Unitarian church. So I'd go to the early morning Mass and then belt over to Monterey from Salinas to go to the Monterey Unitarian Church up in the hills. And
how old were you at this time?
16, 17.
And excited to double dip churches on a Sunday.
Absolutely. And I mean, I was a bit strange because even as a 14-year-old, I wanted to go to church. There was something really important about being in church for me. And there always has been.
Yeah. And so from Monterey and that whole era, is that whenever you then moved back to Britain? When did that take place?
Yes. We moved back when I was about 20.
Okay.
My parents had separated, and my mum wanted to come back to live with her family, closer to her family. Both of my parents are from England. And I wanted to come too. My brother came as well. And then when he got a bit older, he decided he preferred living in America, so went back to America. And I've stayed here and was involved in the Anglican Church, Church of England in London, in my parish church. I was in selection for the priesthood. Yeah. And, the bishop didn't like me very much.
Yes, you had mentioned that the bishop didn't like you, and I'm curious a little bit about that part of the story, because it seems like, and obviously any of this is your story, so correct me any point, but it seems like that was a turning point for moving in a different direction based on really that connection and maybe this is extreme language, you correct me, but the rejection from clergy for a calling that you were feeling. And the disinterest from that person. Maybe you could speak a little to that, because a lot of people have had engagement with church leadership in ways that have been reshaping of their life based on a relationship with a clergy member, and it sounds like that was a turning point.
Well, it was a little bit strange in the whole lead up to it. The parish priest here in this part of East London was quite supportive of me. And of course, I'm coming to Britain from America, and the attitude toward church generally in Britain is very different to America. The attitude of the Church of England in its parish system in Britain is different as well. So the churches here are much, it is possibly the only denomination and the only church you will have in a community. So it serves quite a different purpose. And it's there for everyone. And I think that's quite valuable. What ended up happening with this bishop is he ends up with, me coming in, I must have been in my late 20s, early 30s, and saying to him, here I am, I want to be a priest. And he kind of goes, so tell me what you think about the Bible and the Nicene Creed, and asks me all of these things. And I have this totally out of left field point of view. which has him come in and say, well, I think you're really opinionated and quite difficult, and I wouldn't know where to put you as a curate.
From the person who is seemingly obsessed with the Nicene Creed and who has quite the opinion. Your opinion.
Yes. Yeah. So I was far too opinionated. And like you said, he wouldn't know where to place me. So what he kind of said is, once you've finished your undergraduate work, take a year and then we'll decide. So go and work in a parish for a year and then we'll decide. No. This is all madness. You think I'm difficult? I am. But you think I'm difficult? And, some of the issue is also around me being with my partner. And we're still together. We've been together for over 20 years. My partner's not a Christian. And one of the things possibly the most hurtful thing I found in what he said was, my partner not being a Christian would be like me being a musician with someone who's tone deaf. And that was possibly the most hurtful thing. Yeah. Yeah. And so, as you said, I began to really question what I was doing in a place that couldn't recognize what I could bring. Or at least with a bishop who couldn't recognize what I could bring. And so I stepped away from the Church of England. And of course, the odd thing is, everybody's always a member of the Church of England. So you don't sort of sign up. You go on a parish roll after a particular amount of time so that you can participate in the governance of that parish. But, if you are confirmed in the Church of England, you're always in the Church of England. So it's a different idea to it. And so I went back to a Unitarian church and I started going to the Religious Society of Friends, the Quakers. And I'd encountered both before, as I said. In America, I was part of a Unitarian community as well. And, I remember the history books in Indiana with Quakers. And then coming here, I attended a couple of Quaker meetings just to see what they were like. And felt the right place.
Yeah. And the Quakers are, extremely contemplative. People often overlook that. My history in the Vineyard, John Wimber, who started the Vineyard, was a Quaker minister first. And that's where the Vineyard got the influence for waiting on the Holy Spirit, is from that. And so I'm curious, through your experience with the Friends Church, was it from there that you started to have the influence? Well, it probably was earlier, based on what we talked about before. So that was earlier. And then you had influence in more of a Buddhist, yogic sort of influence. And then how did that pair with, I guess, you're coming from this very high church place to a very more low Friends Church, what was that experience like? And then merging that with this Eastern philosophy, did that re-enter your life at that point? Or was it always in your life, even through the high church experience?
It was always in my life. So as a teenager, I read the autobiography of a yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda, and I would read a lot of Buddhist work. And I would read loads of stuff. I was like Karen Armstrong and Marcus Borg and Brian McLaren and all these, Richard Rohr, all these people were in my life from that quite early time. So I remember reading Yogananda's book and it just sort of exploded my brain because this instinct that I had that exclusivity wasn't the answer. As in being overly bound in a tradition instead of rooted in a tradition. Being bound in a tradition was not what did not feel right to me. And having that experience of it's okay. There is something more. I can do this. My instinct is right. Was overwhelming. And so I kept on carrying that. That's one of the reasons the bishop found me too difficult. Because, I was religion in its true sense of, tying back, retying, felt like I was literally being tied up. So I wanted a different answer for religion. The parish priest who supported me through that initial selection process, he would often talk about Buddhism. He was very much interested in Buddhism. I don't know if he'd taken refuge or had some sort of Buddhist practice that he didn't talk about, but he would use it to inform his Christianity. I could tell that. In the same way that I wanted then to use Buddhism and yogic thinking to inform mine. And of course, I was a bit like a pinball machine and ricocheting around, and so rejecting things and accepting other things and rejecting those, and really going through that deconstruction process that you've spoken about so wonderfully, and then building it back up again, and then knocking it down and building it back up. So that whole process it took a long time, and where I might not have found the support in the Church of England, I could find support amongst Unitarians and amongst Quakers, because certainly in the Society of Friends, we can distinguish between what we might call religion and spirituality, where religion is quite held very loosely by the society, but spirituality is seen as something that we all work on our own, and we all support each other in our individual spiritual practice and our individual spiritual exploration. So there's I don't want to say it's a duality, but there's two things that sit very close to each other, but a line between them.
Yeah. So with some of that, you mentioned a book that I remember I've not thumbed through it in a long time, but it was I couldn't be a Christian without the Buddha or something. I forget if that was
yes. Paul Nitter's book title. Without the Buddha, I couldn't be a Christian. Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
And I would love for you to speak a little bit more to that, because I know that you did pinball around a lot, but there seemingly is this consistency in the Christian tradition while exploring these other philosophies and actually, integrating those practices. A lot of time, even for me, it was a rejection. It was a complete removal of all of that and then into other worlds. And it sounds like yours was, you were consistently a part of the tradition while alongside doing these things, and how that came together. And I think that book title seemingly is kind of a really great way to explain some of that in your own story. Because a lot of people they're curious about, what do I do with all of this? And some people are interested. People resonate with us because they have an affinity for Jesus and the wisdom of Jesus and this tradition of Christianity, but yet are either exploring other things, or they're at least open to other, understandings and concepts to help enrich their Christianity. And it sounds like through our conversations and things that's been kind of your outflow. So to speak to some of those people that might, be in some of the places of coexistence in that way.
So I think for me, one of the big breakthroughs was being able to distinguish between Christianity and churchianity.
Yeah.
Christianity is not the church. I love the church, in whatever way I'm looking at it, whether it's the Anglican Church or the Society of Friends or however, doesn't matter. It's just a capital C church. But it's not Christ. I don't need the church to get to Christ. Christ comes to me, and I come to Christ. And there's the Muslim saying, if you take one step towards God and he runs 100 towards you. And I think that's very true. So being able to distinguish between those two allow me to go, okay, so it doesn't necessarily matter what the church is telling me is right or wrong. I can keep my roots planted firmly in Christ. I can then explore and see, well, what do other people call Christ? This can't just be one thing. It can't just be, one event. This is too big. So we might call it Krishna consciousness. We might call it Buddha nature. We might call any of these things. And as I explore Buddhism, and I'm doing a training as a Dharma teacher at the moment, through Noah Rasheta's podcast, The Secular Buddhist, which is brilliant because he's helping us to explore Buddhism, to be a better whatever we are. So I can use the Buddhist teachings and the Eightfold Path, for example, to flesh out the Beatitudes.
Mm-hmm.
The Beatitudes are kind of coded in a way, and you need to read a lot to get them. And it's brilliant. It's brilliant that they're coded because you can sit and chew on them for years and years and years. But if I sort of bring the two together, I feel like I can live them better without having to, do all the intellectual work to sort of unpick them.
Mm-hmm.
So I find the Buddha path it cuts through for me. And it allows the light to shine on what I need to do to be a Christian, how I can be a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the idea of being a Buddhist, for example, is slightly incorrect. Buddhism is something you do. It's not something that you become or are. Right. And it's allowed me to think, how do I do Christianity? It's not just going to Mass or going to meeting for worship and sitting and waiting and seeing how the Spirit flows. It's not just that. There's a whole turning of life in it.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, bringing in Buddha is quite necessary. Bringing in yoga is very necessary. It allows me to have the unified view rather than sitting with a duality that I find difficult to reconcile.
You had mentioned that it is, I said, everyone sees spirituality through their own unique lens. How do you describe yours? And you said Buddhist informed Christocentric Vedanta. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, but then you say so complicated. Shorthand is I'm a Christian yogi.
Yeah.
Now, with some of that, and I love all of that. And Vedanta is, I love like the Sermon on the Mount, according to Vedanta, that book, if you've read that. It's beautiful. And it's brilliant. And I love that. But I can just see myself in earlier forms and stages. And even as what you've been speaking to, which I totally love. And that's why we've connected and become friends. But for those that feel they hear some of these things, and maybe some people don't even know what Vedanta is, for that matter, which never feel bad about things you didn't know about, because at one point in time, I didn't know about them. Nobody knows about anything.
No.
We're all learning and being informed. And so it's never like a smartness game or anything like that. But I'm curious for people that are feeling how they sort this out in their head, though, from more of like a theological perspective. Like, I hear what you guys are saying, but doesn't my allegiance to Christ and the Father and Yahweh, doesn't my allegiance become compromised if I start learning from some, Indian sage sitting in lotus position? Like, am I being true? And do you ever struggle with that? And how do you find reconciliation from that perspective?
Yes, I struggle sometimes. And the thing that I do to sort of very bluntly, this will be very blunt, knock myself out of it is, how small do I think God is? I mean, if I think I can hold God in my mind and decide how God is, then I'm doing something wrong. So
Right.
that's the sort of thing that knocks me out of it. However, on a more practical note, so there is a great Indian sage. She left her body in 1981, I think, or just before I was born. Ananda Ma. She comes up in the autobiography of a yogi, in a chapter in that. At some point in her life, in a similar way to the way that Ramakrishna practiced all the different religions, Ma went through what's called her sadhana period, where she experienced all of the different traditions. And where she was in India, there were Muslims as well, and Christians and Sikhs. And when she was quite young, I think, either almost 20, one of her Muslim neighbors died. And she could say all of the prayers. Just spontaneously, she was able to do that. And was able to bring the Muslim community closer to the Hindu community through doing that. When approached by Christians, they would see Christ when they looked at her, or Mary. When asked about, can I have an allegiance to you because I'm a Christian, she would say, everything is in me and I'm in Christ. We're all one. There's no difference. And so after I had a very powerful experience with her in a dream, my devotion to Mary began to grow. I grew up, quite Protestant, as you might have guessed. So Mary was never really in the picture. And suddenly I'm sitting there thinking, Mary would be the perfect Quaker. She holds these things in her heart. And that's, to me, what Meeting for Worship is. So my devotion to Mary, I could be one of a very small handful of Quakers who have a devotion to Mary. But I do. And it comes through Ananda Ma. I look at Ma and I see Mary, and I look at Mary and I see Ma. So for me, it's through people like Ananda Ma or Ramakrishna or Vivekananda, who really brought Vedanta, and here is the Vedanta, to the West in a way that is comprehensible to Christians. They saved me. They really saved me. And they saved me for Christ. They saved me for Jesus. So it's through those experiences that I I am a Christian. I can't be anything else. I don't want to be anything else. I love having my complicated shorthand of, being a Christian yogi, because it's how I am in the world. But if you were to say to me, would you become a Hindu? I would say no, because it's not mine. I grew up as a Christian. That is how I am.
I've had some similar experiences with that over the years of wanting to become something else, thinking if I could just, I was born into Christianity and trained in Christianity and raised in Christianity and finally felt like I was over the game of Christianity. I thought, well, maybe if I really became a, Buddhist or a devotee of Krishna or whatever, then I will have some new sense of identity and self, and validation for a real path that's, not so caught up in all the games of the West like Christianity has become and what have you. And I was sorting through some of that. And similarly, I was listening during that time. I was listening to there's this kirtan. He was with Ram Dass. His name's Krishna Das, and
yes.
he's a Westerner, from New York. I forget his like real name, but he was sharing one of his like albums. He would do like a song and then a little like talk in between, and it's like an album's like back from like the year 2000 or something. And I was listening to this and I was kind of like in this season of sorting through it, and he told a story, and I think it was divine. I think it was synchronistic that I was going through this, and I happened to be listening to this album, listening to him a lot, and then found this album. And he shared a story where they all these, people from America were with Niyam Karoli Baba, Maharaji, and they were all wanting to get all the wisdom and the information from a real guru, and they ventured from America and ventured far and wanted him to show him the ways of the Hindu path, the Vedantic path. And he just kept saying, be like Jesus, be like Christ. And Krishna Das was saying, we all just came from America where that's all we've been hearing, dude. Like, we're trying to get out of that and learn something new so that we can become real spiritually enlightened people. And he just kept telling them that same thing over and over. And they're like, what do you mean? And he would just kind of laugh and like walk away, And one day, finally, they said, tell us what you mean by this be like Christ thing that you just keep, seemingly laughing at us about. And he said that he paused. And he began to get tears in his eyes, and he said, be like Christ because Christ lost himself in love.
Yes.
And any goal, if you will, I'm not a sports person or anything, but any goal, if you will, of the spiritual path, whatever they were looking for, that group of Westerners there, was always able to be found right wherever they came from, because it's all about losing yourself in love. And that's the point, not learning Sanskrit or, how to teach the Bhagavad Gita, or in our context, not knowing what the actual, hermeneutics are of your particular sect, or, it's about losing yourself in love. And what I love about your story is when you operate from that lens, everything begins to, you see the fingerprint of God in the various ways expressing. And it's all about that losing self in love. And so anyways, my experience, like similar to you, is that I didn't need to become a Buddhist. I didn't need to become anything other. I don't even really need the label Christian, by the way, either. And as you know, Jesus wasn't a Christian. So, but to land this plane of this part is, I just feel like it's something that's so important for people to realize, is that another identity is not going to help you feel any more free.
No, it might make it worse, actually.
Yeah, right?
It really might. As you said, the label of Christian not necessarily always being helpful either. I kind of think, well, I want the religion of Jesus, not the religion about Jesus.
Yeah.
That, it's like the distinction between Christianity and churchianity. It's the same kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I want to love as he loved. I want to, I think when Neem Karoli Baba was talking about the love of Christ and the losing of his self, I think he also talked about tears in that. I think he did. And I know Anandamayi Ma would say that the only way to God is through profuse tears. And I think tears aren't necessarily always coming from our eyes. I think we can cry inside too. And in my work as a therapist, I often feel tears come up. They very, very rarely come out. but I'll cry inside at some of what I hear.
Yeah. Richard Rohr said that you can typically know the mystics by those who are quick to tears. And, whether that's actually an external thing that happens or not, it's a moving of the soul that's impacted by that. And I think, obviously the shortest verse in scripture is Jesus wept. And I think that it's because there's something to, when you weep, you don't need some big long explanation in words and concept. It's because something is real that's taking place, and there's a connection that's truly deeply there. And there's a connection between the shortest verse being weeping, because weeping doesn't need many words. No. It's something that transcends that and is deeper than that. You sometimes refer to yourself as a mystic as well. And is that maybe a term that you use? Do you like the word mystic and using it with where you're at, or no?
I don't tend to use it that much, actually.
Yeah.
No, I don't tend to use it that much. And when you asked that, I thought, I don't know if I like it even.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I had that in a reaction to it in that moment. I like what the word holds, for sure. I'm not sure about it. Maybe for me, it's it might be a word that needs a lot of explanation.
Yeah. Interesting. Because I feel like, so much of what you've said, I'm like, that's the mystic experience, for sure. But I do understand, and I'm learning too, that people do have different connotations with that language, and everything needs a little explanation. I've learned,
Yes. Yes. And just with that word alone, sometimes, if I mentioned earlier that I had a dream, that is not my only mystical experience. If I were to say to my partner, I had a mystical experience, he'd say, well, you're having them all the time.
Yeah.
God is everywhere all the time. So what do you expect?
It's so funny. So you mentioned some of your work. I would love to invite people into some of that world and what you see and how your practice helps you embody this in your work, in your life, because your work's unique in that, some people, they go to work and they just some of my other work, it's not emotional at all. It's helping businesses with their insurance, although some meaningful conversations have come up, but your work is quite pointed towards the soul for all intents and purposes. And so in a way, I still think, without maybe all of the titles and weird robes, you're quite a clergyman at this point. And the joke's on them. But can you speak a little bit to, because you said also, and just to, I guess, dovetail this a little bit, is that any sort of beliefs that we hold really are to shape who we are. And Jesus, if you really take his words sincerely, is always telling us this. You'll know a tree by its fruit. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. You look in the book thinking that in them they hold life, but I am the life, and I think that any sort of intentional, sincere spiritual practice is about I use the word transformation, but it's only one. Transformation is one word. I also think realization or a unveiling would be another word. It's like both simultaneous. I talked about this at the last Sunday service about how we are becoming, but I use language becoming who we've always been. It's like this paradox that's happening. But anything should be moving us more towards that. And you have a direct opportunity in your vocation to embody the wisdom and principles of the spiritual path and work directly with people who are moving through those spaces. So maybe can you just speak to us a little bit about how your spiritual practice actually is your lived life and vocation too?
Yeah. Well, some of my work is also less emotional. I work in gyms. I teach spin classes and yoga classes as well. So some
That's
of it's
very
just yelling at
embodied,
people.
though.
But it's very embodied. But I teach a spin class on a Wednesday and then have lunch and go to a charity in Bethnal Green, which is in East London, where I see people who come for psychotherapy. So I'm in my 4th of 5 years of training as a Gestalt therapist. And Gestalt psychotherapy is taught in different ways in different places. In Britain, we often ignore the spiritual element of Gestalt, which I think is very sad. But that's a reflection of our culture in Britain more than anything else, I think. Fritz Perls, who sort of started Gestalt therapy or formulated it, was supremely interested in Zen and the moments of enlightenment and awareness. And part of, if you ask me to sum up Gestalt therapy in a nutshell, I would say awareness. I can do it in one word. So a lot of what I do is sit quietly. One of the beautiful things about the kind of psychotherapy that Gestalt is that I can interact. So I don't sit there like a psychoanalyst and say nothing and don't even look at my client. And at the same time, it's not TV psychotherapy. So I'm not sort of just nodding and making affirming faces or saying all the time. I can challenge people. I can call people out on their stuff. I can say, you didn't say that last week. What's going on? So I can challenge people. I can be very challenging. Surprise myself sometimes. But my spiritual practice, so one, the practice of waiting in the way that we do in the Society of Friends. And in Britain, we only have one kind of Quaker, whereas in America, there are quite a variety of Quakers. In Britain, we are only what Americans would call unprogrammed Quaker meetings. So that helps me in group therapy for sure. But my yoga practice, my meditation practice means that I can sit. And a lot of therapy is sitting. I can sit and wait and listen and breathe. I'm working on my MA, the project of the MA at the moment, and was listening to it with my supervisor, listening to a recorded session with my supervisor. And I said something to a client. He responded to me. It was something that we were trying out with each other that was really powerful. And when he said the words back to me, I had to just sit and breathe. It was so much. And if I'd said something like to comfort him or said something, it would have been just me trying to comfort myself. And I just sat and breathed. And after that session, quite often my next client arrives early, and I will go out and say hello to her and tell her I'm coming in a few minutes to get her. I couldn't do it that time. I had to go back into my office and close the door and just sit there. Because I was holding so much in that moment. And when you mentioned, the shortest verse in the Bible of Jesus wept, the thing that sticks out in my head a lot about Jesus now is when he wasn't with people, when he went up the mountain and sat alone and was in silence. And of course, now when we read it in the Bible, it's in words, so we don't get the silence because we're reading it. But Jesus took himself away from the world. At one point he went out on the boat so he could talk to people because they were so close to him. So you're with the world, you're with someone's pain, like real pain.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to take a step away. And you might have a place that you go to that no one else knows about. I don't mean necessarily just inside. I mean, you might have a place in your city where you live, where you go, where no one else knows you go. Because that's your place.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I live in London, so I don't have, for me, going into nature is slightly more challenging. But if you're able to go up into the hills or into the mountains, particularly if you're in California, you go somewhere where no one necessarily knows where you are.
Mm-hmm.
It's so important. And I can do the inside, stepping back. Even if I'm with a client, I might have to do some inside stepping back.
Mm.
But, doing the physical one is also really important. And every morning and every evening, I meditate.
Mm-hmm. You had mentioned that... go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, particularly after intense days, if, a training weekend or group, in Gestalt, we love group work, really intense group. Particularly at the beginning of training, I might have to meditate in the middle of the day because I just had no other way of processing what was going on.
Mm.
Sorry.
No, don't apologize. It's great. In your practice, you mentioned that you had, Kriya Yoga and transcendental meditation has been something you've explored. And I know that, people as they're getting familiar with meditation, they might run across transcendental meditation, and people from Christian backgrounds definitely will be apprehensive to that, any sort of transcendental thing. And even the word mystic, like we talked about, like people are a little like, what do you mean by that? It sounds a little woo-woo or something. But I found transcendental meditation, and you had mentioned in the forum about using Christian mantra in that same kind of TM container, but using like the contents of the container being, Christian mantra. I'm curious, maybe if you can share, because you said you meditate twice a day, which in transcendental meditation, that's the key, right? It's 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the afternoon or evening. So do you still follow that rhythm? And then what does that rhythm look like for you? Do you have your secret word, or do you tend to use, the other mantras or,
So my morning and evening spiritual practice is, some asana. So it's get up, brush my teeth, do the stuff, get on the yoga mat, move. And depending on how much time I have will depend on how much asana practice I do. Maybe a little Pilates, just something to move in the morning. And then I'll sit for the 20 minutes usually. Sometimes, if I can, I'll sit for longer. And it doesn't have to be fancy. Nothing in this is fancy. Nothing in this is a mystery either. It's all packaged and coded, and it's like it's a great secret. There is no secret.
Yes. This is why we're friends.
If you start delving into Kriya Yoga and you've done, if you've done a yoga class with me, you'll have seen it all. It's not like it's some great secret like they make it out to be. It's just yoga. So this, and the secret words, come on, man. They are very useful. There is something that is useful about these secret words, because they are not what we would consider a word. They're just sounds.
Right.
So it's a useful thing, but you could use Maranatha, which is the word given by the World Community of Christian Meditation. Essentially, John Main's school of meditation is teaching TM. It's the same idea. They just package it in Christian language and they teach it for free.
Yeah.
So Maranatha means come, Lord, or the Lord has come, depending on where you put the break in the word. And it's an Aramaic word. It's the language Jesus spoke. So for me, that word's quite powerful. Sometimes I use my TM secret word. Sometimes I'll just sit and say, so hum. So as I breathe in, hum as I breathe out. That comes up as one of the Kriya Yoga practices. But it's essentially the most basic form of yoga meditation. And so hum means I am that. And if you reverse it, hum sa that I am. It's beautiful. It's so simple. And that's all you need. And sometimes if I want to read about Christian meditation, I end up on Google with, is it okay for Christians to meditate? And sometimes I'll click on them because I want to laugh, but I'll click on them and read, and I feel so bad. It hurts me to read the fear in that question.
Yes.
And the fear in the answer, as if, this idea that no thoughts means the devil can get into your mind.
I know.
And that silence in the John Main's tradition, the silent place is called pure prayer. So it's that the silence of pure prayer. Thomas Keating talks, about the processing of the thoughts. He calls it divine therapy, and I think that's amazing. But also, allowing the silence. And all of these are different ways of looking at what is generally called transcendental meditation. It's a very powerful tool. It is a package, though. So, and I don't think there's anything to fear, even if you want to go and learn the TM way and get a secret word. There's nothing to fear. Yeah. And my mother said to me something about, she had heard that the yoga poses were given the names of Hindu gods. And I was like, well, if it was called the Babe Ruth pose, would it make a difference? I mean, it's, I could give them all rugby words or something. I could call them whatever you want. It's just a name. Just because I'm in, Virabhadrasana 2, or Warrior 2, I'm not worshipping Virabhadra, how he's related to Shiva. That's not the purpose. It's just a name. All of these are just words, just names.
I think that's really important for people to learn is that, and we had a discussion group last night. We have a group that meets called Philoso Talks, and it's just more of a deep dive. We call it a deep dive discussion group and talking about symbolism and more of the esoteric view of things. And one of the things that came up last night was about really the theme was really discernment. And that's kind of a big theme that I teach about a lot, is because it really comes down to just your own inner discernment, and that nothing outside of you really has any power unless you give yourself to that in that way. And it's really about the posture of the heart. And, when people are wanting to learn and explore, I feel like you mentioned, like the Google search thing, it's so much fear around it. And so people give that power and authority to these things, but it's because they did that. They gave it that. And you mentioned at the beginning of this talk, and maybe you can circle back to some of it, because I think it's really good about this sense of being, when you're rooted, you can explore and you're not fearful anymore. Maybe can you speak a little bit about that to people who do have kind of an interest and curiosity, but they might be dealing with a little bit of that inner fear about what's okay and not okay?
I think the question ultimately ends up being, how is what I'm going to do going to help me be more Christian or more devoted to Christ? And you find your own ways, because ultimately, I mean, this is one of the beautiful things about being a Quaker. There's nothing between me and God. There's nothing. So turning around and then asking the internet, or asking somebody with, authority, in air quotes, to approve. Now, who's owning your relationship to God? Is it you or is it someone else? So if you go and you learn Kriya Yoga, and you're able to have more inner silence and more patience, you're able to be gentler with others, you're able to have a wider world view. How is any of that a sin? That's all of what Christ called us to do. And if it allows your heart to blossom, then how can it be harmful?
Yeah. I think, people just wrestle with that. I heard this years ago. I can't really name where it came from, but the inner faithful soldier that we all have. It's like this faithful soldier, like, or the no true Scotsman kind of thing. This is you. If you were really a believer, you wouldn't even have the temptation to learn meditation, or whatever it might be. It's like this very fundamental. Yeah.
But Jesus meditated.
Yeah.
And we don't, of course, I've got a book that's written by somebody from the TM world talking about, pretty much saying that he taught TM. Nonsense. But
you're right.
He took himself away from the world to sit in quiet and pray. We don't know what his prayer looked like. We have the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father, which he taught as a mantra, really. But we don't know what his prayer looked like. Go into your room, inner room, and close the door, and be there where your Father knows your secrets.
Yeah.
Be in the silence. So he told us to do it. Yet we, there's the fear of not being a good Christian, not being devoted to Christ. Like I said, when I hear it hurts, because to me, that's what he would want us to do.
Yeah.
And maybe the inner soldier, if I think about military men and women who have all of the stripes on their uniforms from different things that they've done, maybe you have a TM stripe, or a Vipassana 10-day retreat stripe, or whatever it is. You can have stripes.
Yeah. Just don't get too identified with them,
Exactly.
But they're all the experiences.
And they are just techniques. No technique, whatever it is, will ever get you saved or not.
Right.
It will never take you anywhere. It is a boat. The Buddha says it beautifully. It's a boat. And then you get out the boat and you leave it.
Right.
The same with church. However we want to construct it, we were talking, as we said before we turned on the recording, I went to an Anglican church on Sunday. It was beautiful. It's a boat, and I can get in the boat and go for a ride and get out.
Yeah. There's a lightness about that I think people have the invitation to step into. And that's the thing for me, is I feel so much lighter. And I think, that old, the G.K. Chesterton thing, the angels can fly because they take themselves lightly. And it's I remember I was so heavy whenever I was so obsessed with my dogmas and so scared. It was so heavy. It was so, And I had to remember so much, you know,
Yes.
and to make sure I could stay in the group and stay valid and stay authoritative and all of this. And it's like, it's so freeing and liberating. And we forget, for freedom, Christ has set you free.
And it's a constant proving. It's almost like getting out your certificates and showing them constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And, you mentioned G.K. Chesterton. I love Alan Watts. And, he says, we get so upset because we take seriously what God meant for fun.
Yes, that's it. That's it. As we wrap up the conversation, although I feel like we could speak for a lot longer, maybe we'll need another one. But one of the things you had mentioned, I think this is a really great dovetail for where we're at right now, is what you would hope to maybe give to the broader community, and not just the current community, but people that are listening to this, or just people that are, again, have an affinity for the wisdom of Jesus and an intention to integrate the practices of living like Christ, that's Christ-like. Christ-likeness is the qualification of a Christian in my book. Am I seeking to embody Christ-likeness? That's the qualification. Yeah. Is there anything you'd like to impart? Some of the things you were mentioning on here, one of the questions was about, what do you hope people take away from this conversation? And I think some of the things that we've just been speaking about names that so well, but, and mentioning about that there's nothing that can change how God loves you. And, is there anything additionally that you would like to speak to impart people with, to take away from this, not only the current community, but those who have an affinity for living in tune with Christ with a more widened aperture, what they could take away from this?
Well, you just said one of the things, which is that nothing can ever change how God loves you.
Well, I also read that from your thing, so I quoted you. So
I was aware of that.
Okay.
That's one of the main things. Nothing can change it, ever.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, whether you're gay or straight or purple or you have 3 legs. It really doesn't matter. Nothing can change it. In the Society of Friends, we say that there is that of God in all people. And we do say it, that of God, because we don't know what it means. We can only say that of God. And the other thing I would say is have roots. Really. I mean, it's fine. Be a Christian. Know that's where your home is. And, if you're in the current community and you're able to go, I watch the YouTube videos. If you can go to these wonderful services, I envy you. And that's your home. That's your home. And if you need to go and try another thing, you can try another thing. It doesn't mean you can't go back.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you can't get angry with the current community. I have beef with the Society of Friends at the moment.
Yeah.
A lot. That's part of why I went to an Anglican church on Sunday. I was just, the beef was real. I now needed to go somewhere else. And it's fine. It's absolutely fine, because this Sunday I can go back to my regular meeting, and after the main meeting for worship, I'm leading a session on Quaker spirituality. So it's fine to explore. It's fine to get angry. And if at some point the Society of Friends doesn't work for me anymore, it's fine to leave. It's fine to find something else. There's only one relationship that matters in the end, and it's the relationship between you and God. And nothing else can come in between that.
Yeah, that's really good. That feels like a good place to leave people encouraged. Is there anything, any way, like if people are interested in connecting with you, getting in touch with you, are you okay if we add any contact information down below? Is there anything you're working on that people could connect with, or Just open to maybe answer any questions or anything.
I'm not very active on social media, and I don't have a website or anything. You can, of course, add on my Instagram. I will say my Instagram is mostly gym pics. So,
which you can't tell right now. If people are watching this, Tristan is freaking stacked, dude. Like you're legit. You and my friend Danny Prada in Florida are just like freaking the strongest contemplatives I think that exist.
And meditation is very useful when you're going to pull heavy weight. It really is. You get quiet before you do it. But yeah, you can add, come on my Instagram. You can message me. It's a private account, but as long as you don't have just a blank face, I'll let you follow me, and you can send me a message and we can talk.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and your wisdom. And I just love, again, that like the current community is bigger than just San Diego, and just grateful for, this past year becoming friends and having some talks on the phone and, Instagram DM story replies, and, it's been fun.
Yes, it really has. And what I said to you initially, I think when I first contacted you, I mean, if I had to sort of imagine up a church that I would like to have, it would be like the current. So I really think it's an amazing thing you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, one of these days you'll have to come visit in person.
Next time I'm in California, I will.
Yes. So good. Thank you, Tristan.
Thank you.